Hey everyone, and welcome to another one of our deep dives into investment basics. Today, we're tackling a sector that is, well, totally unique from just about anything else out there, healthcare. So what makes it so different? Just let that sink in for a minute. Almost every other industry out there depends on us wanting to spend money. We can definitely live without the newest phone, that fancy cup of coffee, or a brand new car. But healthcare? That is a completely different ballgame. It's one of the only parts of our economy that is tied directly to our survival. When we get sick, we need doctors, we need medicine, we need care. It's not a luxury, it's a necessity. And that constant, non-negotiable demand is exactly what makes this sector such a fascinating place for any investor to really get their head around.
And you are definitely going to want to stick around for this one. We're about to break down all the major players within this massive sector. And at the very end, I'm going to arm you with a super simple, powerful checklist that ties all these big ideas together. It's the perfect tool to help guide your own research.
Okay, so first things first. Why even focus on healthcare? Well, like we were just saying, it all comes back to survival. And that gives the sector what we call a defensive quality. It means that even when the economy hits a rough patch, people still need healthcare, so demand stays pretty consistent. But here's the cool part. It's not just defensive. It's also a massive growth engine, as you're about to see. The story this chart tells is, wow, it's pretty incredible. If you go back to 1980, healthcare spending was about 9% of the entire U.S. economy. Fast forward to 2002, and it had jumped all the way up to 15%. And the projections, they showed this trend is just going to keep on going, with healthcare going way faster than the overall economy. This isn't just some fad. It's a huge structural shift that's been happening for decades. So what protects the companies that are already in this space? Well, they have these incredibly wide economic moats. Think of them as giant barriers that make it super tough for new competitors to just jump in. You've got things like patents on drugs that create a legal monopoly for a time. The cost to even try to start a new drug company is astronomical. The products are highly specialized. And of course, the huge established players are so big, they have massive cost advantages. And the result of those powerful moats? A jaw-dropping 23% average return on equity. Now, you can think of return on equity as kind of a report card for how well a company is using its investors' money to make even more money. And what's really wild here is that this A-plus grade was held for 5 years, a period that included a major economic recession. This is that defensive growth engine we were talking about, in real time. Strong, consistent profits, even when everything else is struggling. All right, let's start breaking this sector down. First up, the pharmaceutical giants. This is an industry of absolutely insane financial rewards, with some of the highest profit margins you will find anywhere. But, and this is a big but, those huge rewards come with equally huge stakes and a ton of risk. You know, inside the drug industry, there are really two completely different games being played. On one side, you've got your branded drugs. These are the new, innovative medicines that are protected by patents. They cost a fortune in research and development, but if they hit, they get to be a monopoly for a while, leading to these unbelievable gross margins of 75 to 85%. Then, on the other side, you've got generic drugs. Once a patent on a branded drug runs out, these guys can come in and make chemical copies. Their R&D costs are tiny, but they're all competing on price, which means their margins are much, much lower. Let's just focus on the cost of that branded drug innovation for a second. The average cost to develop one single successful drug is a mind-blowing $800 million. And get this, to make matters even crazier, only about a third of the drugs that actually make it all the way to the pharmacy shelf ever make back that initial investment. This huge financial barrier is a big reason why the industry is dominated by just a few massive companies. So where does all that cash go? Well, it gets poured into this incredibly long, expensive, and risky process we call the drug development gauntlet. It all starts with testing on animals, but from there, every single step is a major hurdle. It moves to phase 1 human trials to make sure it's safe, but the odds are brutal. A drug entering phase 1 has only about a 20% chance of ever getting approved. Then comes phase 2 to see if it actually works, where more than half of the drugs that made it this far fail. If it survives that, it faces the massive phase 3 trial for long-term safety. And even after all that, it still has to get past the final boss, the FDA review. It's a process that is literally defined by failure, and that's where all the risk is. So what's the secret sauce? What separates the winners from the losers in this tough game? This table really nails it. The big winners often have blockbuster drugs that drive huge profits. They're masters at managing their patents to get the most out of that monopoly period. And this is so important. They have a full pipeline of new drugs in development to replace the old ones as patents expire. They have a powerful sales force building relationships with doctors. And, of course, they go after big markets, like chronic diseases that promise steady revenue for years. Now, if you thought Big Pharma sounded like a roller coaster, let's talk about its younger, maybe cooler, and definitely more volatile cousin, biotechnology. This is the absolute frontier of medical science, and with that comes a whole different level of risk and, yes, potential reward.
So what exactly is biotech? Well, while your traditional pharma company is usually working with chemicals, biotech firms use living systems. They're working at the cellular and molecular level to create therapies. They're basically hacking biology itself. The science is often groundbreaking, but a lot of it is completely unproven, which just adds another huge layer of scientific risk on top of that already brutal drug development process.
It is so important to understand that not all biotech companies are the same. Not even close. You can kind of think of them in tiers. At one end, you have the established giants, the big names that are already profitable and have several drugs on the market. They're much lower risk, but the vast majority of biotech firms are on the other end of the spectrum. These are speculative companies with no products, no revenue, and they're years and years away from even dreaming of profitability. Investing in one of these is less like traditional investing and a lot more like buying a lottery ticket. So if you're looking at this space, how do you reduce that lottery ticket kind of risk? You focus on the more established players. You look for companies that have several drugs in the final stages of those clinical trials. That way, they're not betting the whole farm on one single product. You check their finances to make sure they have a ton of cash on hand so they can fund their own research without constantly asking investors for more money. And it's a great sign if they've built their own sales force, because that means they get to keep more of the profits when a drug finally succeeds. Okay, so we've talked about the companies that actually create the drugs and treatments, but the healthcare world is way bigger than that. Let's shift gears and look at two other huge pillars: the companies that make the hardware, all the medical devices, and the companies that act as the gatekeepers for the whole system, the insurance providers. Medical device companies, the folks who make everything from pacemakers to robotic surgical arms, can be really fantastic investments. Their moats are built on relationships and expertise. Think about it. Once a surgeon spends years learning how to use one company's specific set of tools, the time and effort it would take to switch to a competitor is enormous. That creates incredible loyalty and gives the device company a lot of power when it comes to pricing. And unlike the all-or-nothing gambles in the drug world, innovation here is often evolutionary. The next artificial hip will be a bit better, but it's not a crazy revolution, which means there's less risk of a competitor suddenly making your product totally obsolete overnight. And now for the gatekeepers, the insurance companies. Broadly speaking, there are two ways they make money. In a fee-based model, they're basically just getting paid to do the paperwork for a big employer who is actually taking on the financial risk of their employees' health. This gives the insurer a very stable, predictable stream of cash. In the risk-based model, however, the insurance company is the one writing the policy. They bear the risk. If costs are low, they can make a ton of money. But if costs unexpectedly skyrocket, their profits can get completely wiped out. So for an investor, that fee-based model is generally a much safer bet. And here is the single most important number to look at when you're analyzing those risk-based insurers: the medical loss ratio. It sounds complicated, but it's actually super simple. It just tells you what percentage of every dollar they collect in premiums goes out the door to pay for actual medical care. The average is right around 84 to 85%. A company that consistently keeps this number low is showing that it's really good at managing costs. But a ratio that starts creeping up year after year, that can be a major red flag that profits are about to get squeezed. All right, we have covered a ton of ground. We've gone through pharma, biotech, devices, and insurance. We've seen the massive risks and the potential rewards. So now, just like I promised, let's pull it all together. This is the payoff, your actionable checklist for looking at any company in the healthcare space. Here it is. Let's just run through it. First, for drug companies, it's all about surviving that patent cliff. So you want to see long patent lives and, most importantly, a full pipeline of new drugs coming up. It's usually better to favor companies going after huge patient populations. And if a company gets almost all its money from one single blockbuster drug, be really careful. That's a huge risk. In those high-risk areas like biotech and devices, it's often smarter to stick with the established, profitable players. And always, always make sure a company has plenty of cash to fund its research for years. Finally, when you're looking at insurers, remember the two models:
The fee-based business is usually the safer, more stable option.
So there you have it. We've really dissected the entire anatomy of the healthcare sector, from the high stakes world of drug discovery to the steady hardware of medical devices and the complex finances of the insurance gatekeepers. Each one of these industries has its own unique rhythm, its own heartbeat. So the question for you now is, which pulse will you choose to follow?